Welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast, where strategic leaders get straight to the topics, strengthening our awareness and sharpening our minds. The Pen Leader Podcast is produced by Roar, a production division of Mays & Associates Ltd. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Now here is your award-winning host, Dr. Shanda Gore.
And welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the business of trust. And I am so glad to have with me Mr. Steve Watkins, who has been a business reporter for 36 years. He is a freelance writer for Investors Business Daily and has been on staff there or worked as a freelancer for 26 years. He also is a reporter at the Cincinnati Business Courier, where he has worked for 26 years. He covers banking and finance, Kroger, and sports business there. He is a co-authored The Classic Bengals, the 50 Greatest Games in Cincinnati Bengals History. He has won dozens of awards for his writing from the Society of Professional Journalists and the Cleveland Press Club. He is also a graduate of Carroll College. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Steve Watkins. Hello, Steve.
Hi, Shanda. Thanks for having me.
I know that you've done so much work in writing and covering business. And The Insider, I know we met through having that opportunity to be able to do that and covering my book and talking about what's the business trends. And I think I'm going to get right into that because you've talked about trust for years and how important it is. Why do you think it's such a critical issue for leaders, especially right now?
Well, it really is critical. It's an interesting point because it's critical all the time, and it probably is even more critical now than ever. Some of the reasons it's critical at any point in time is, for one, people will follow a leader who they trust. That is one of the critical keys to them even following somebody who purports to be a leader. Is you have to be able to trust them and what kind of guidance they're providing, what direction they're going to be taking you and the organization. So that's one of the big things. Also, if you're going to build relationships that are successful and valuable, and you really need to if you are going to be a successful leader, one of the keys to that is always trust. I've talked to numerous people over the years that have talked about trust being kind of a cornerstone of the ability to build a relationship in any walk of life, whether it's at work, at home, among your friends. Whatever the case is, you really need to be able to trust people if you're going to have any kind of realistic relationship with them. So those are a couple of the big things. Another thing that comes up a lot is speed at which you can do things. And if you, as the leader, are trusted and you talk to your people and say, okay, we're going to go in this direction, if they trust you, they're probably not going to spend hours, days, even weeks saying, does this person really even know what they're talking about? Are they
That's
trying
right.
to pull one over on us? They just, if the leader says, hey, look, the market has changed or our sales are down a little, we have to do this. If you trust them, you may have some follow-up questions, but you feel like, hey, that person has always been trustworthy. I know what they're getting at and why this is the new direction, and we can all push in that direction without wasting a lot of time having to explain and decide if this is even a real issue or not.
It's interesting about that too, because they say time is money. And there could be, if there's too much of a delay, it's going to cost your organization either resources or, again, you may not be able to catch up with a competitor. Especially if you're racing to, maybe it's a new product line and you've got people saying, I don't know about that. Maybe it's not, we've never seen this before. Well, if you don't trust the leader, you're going to ask those questions. But if you trust that they have the knowledge, the background, they built maybe a relationship with you. And this really goes to, business performance. Whether it's employee engagement, retention, or even revenue, what other connections do you see between that?
There have been a lot of different studies that show really all of those things happen. Definitely like employee retention. People will stay at a place where they know they can be trusted, but also that they can trust their boss and their leaders. That's one of the big things. You often hear the adage of people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. And if you have a boss, you can have a job that you really like, but if your boss is somebody who does one thing and says another, and you just don't ever feel like you can really trust what they're trying to do or what they're getting at, people tend to leave. They really don't like that. And so yeah, employee retention is a big one. There are studies that show that trusted companies perform better too. And a lot of these big organizations nationally and internationally will do rankings and lists of, the 50 or 100 most trusted companies. And that's one of the big reasons they do it. One is just these companies have a tendency to be pretty successful. And so it's a good place for people to go work, which means they tend to attract a little higher quality of employee, and the results are better. So, from an investment standpoint, that's typically a good thing too. So, yeah, I think there are definitely connections between whether you have a company and leaders who can be trusted and the results that they end up producing.
Those lists, I do know individuals who shop companies and organizations before they even apply for the job because they're great employees and they're looking to say, I don't want to jump into a fire. And if they're not treating their employees right, or if there's a high turnover, I think about when people apply for jobs and then say, well, how long was the last person in that role or responsibility? What did it look like? Why did they leave? Those are legitimate questions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you say you know people who literally shop those lists because it certainly makes sense to do that in a lot of cases. If you have that as a baseline where you could say, okay, this company has a history of being trusted, you're going to find that turnover is lower. It's probably a little harder to get into those companies, but once you get in, there's a reason it's harder to get in because a lot of the people that get there stay there because they do like working for somebody that they can trust, and they feel more productive too. If you have a leader you can trust, you can produce more. It kind of goes back to the point we made a couple of minutes ago about speed. I mean, if you can do things faster, you can be a lot more productive.
Yes, and I'm thinking about leaders that are taken in the show, and they're thinking maybe they probably thought about instances. If everybody listening is thinking about on a time when you might have lost trust, either with someone or either you lost it or they lost it with you. What occurred in that circumstance. What is one takeaway that you're hoping leaders can walk away with when it comes to trust to keep their minds and their eyes focused on that.
Yeah, I guess the takeaway is that trust is absolutely vital to ensure that you are going to be able to build a successful organization. It's one of those things, often when I do interviews about trust, I'll ask people like yourself, why trust is so important. Not entirely because it's so hard to figure out why it is important, but my guess is if you ask most business people what, 2 or 3 of the biggest qualities that lead to the success of their company are, in many cases, I think people would talk about the product or the innovation or the market niche they're in or something along those lines. But, once you talk about trust with somebody who is successful, in almost all cases, they'll say, "Oh, yeah, that is a absolutely important to us being able to move forward, to grow, and to attract good people." So, I think people, once they think about it, realize it's important, and for some people, granted, it is considered they will say, "Hey, trust is a cornerstone of our organization, and we couldn't get anywhere without it." But for some, it might be something they do, but they just it's not the first thing that comes to mind. And then sadly, of course, there are some organizations where trust really isn't even a factor, and they they usually are not near the top of any lists, whether it's trust or just performance.
No, and it's so true. And think about it with individuals that are saying that it is the cornerstone of our business. I try to, especially in my trainings and workshops, we talk about demonstration. Trust is both a verb and a noun for those understanding. So there's actions that have to take place for trust to really get there. It's not automatic. It's earned, and it's not something that's like building a relationship. So let me see demonstrate. Just don't tell me to trust you. I want to see it through demonstration. As a business journalist, you cover business trends pretty closely. What has been some of the challenges in the business world, especially in today's environment of the remote work, which people have to trust that people are doing work remotely, and then AI, and then this rapid change that's occurring? What are you seeing in business trends?
Yeah, it's a great point with remote work becoming so prevalent after COVID began in 2020, and now we don't think twice about remote work. Where before that it was pretty limited. And you're absolutely right that trust is such a big factor. I think in a lot of cases it's probably the biggest factor in whether a company allows more or less remote work and how productive people are at it. Obviously you could, if your workforce is not trustworthy, you could say, "Go work from home 2 days," and they may not be very productive. And in some jobs, that's gonna show up so quickly that, it's just not gonna work. But there are jobs that might have a long lead time for a project or something like that. And hey, if they don't do anything for a day, it might not even really show up anywhere. So you really do have to have that trust, and you have to have it both ways. Not only does the boss have to trust their people, but the people need to be able to trust the boss, because there is that, just the physical distance and not being there, where you have to be able to trust that the boss does have your best interests and the company's best interests in mind. So yeah, that is definitely one thing. AI is one too, and I would think that is probably a trust factor in a slightly different way, but I think almost every company is dealing in some fashion or other with AI, how they can use it, improve their operations. And of course, all the workforce is thinking, hey, are they using this to try to get rid of my job or a whole bunch of jobs? You'll hear companies say, oh, no, that's not our goal. We want to make it easier for you to do your job. And in some cases, that's true. And then there are some cases where they really are trying to use it to say, hey, now we don't need 200 people on this task that really AI could handle in a few seconds. But if the workforce trusts the leadership, and some of these AI innovations are coming up, then you can look at it and say, because I think a lot of companies do look at these things like, hey, we've got good people here. And if the stuff they're doing, AI can do, it doesn't mean we're going to fire these people, at least most of them. They're good and we want to keep them, and we can have them do something else that will increase the productivity of the whole organization. So if you have trust, that will work both ways, and you'll be able to keep your good people even as you're innovating and making your company more efficient and productive.
What I have found is when I talk to some of the business leaders, that whole philosophy that you just laid out there about it's not about with the replacement of jobs and these 200 people. If you preface it also with the ability that we want to train you to do something else that helps the productivity of the company, even that builds more trust, because it's not about bringing AI in and replacing everybody as much as we want it to be as an efficient tool for you. And then let's have you train up to do this new role that you couldn't maybe never have had an opportunity to do before. And I believe if leadership could, if they really talked about that with AI, bringing AI in, I think to be a little bit more trust with that it's not a replacement of me. I will say this with social media and sci-fi, it has really impacted the trustworthiness of what AI may or may not do within an organization. Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does, by nature, I think it makes people more suspicious because it's this new thing that, whatever time frame 3 years ago, none of us knew anything about. And all of a sudden it's this new thing. It seems powerful. I mean, a pretty good comparison, although somewhat different to those of us who have been around that this long, would be the internet when that really came to being in the mid and late 90s. Really in the early 90s, it came around, but it started getting adopted more a little bit later. But at the time, there was a lot of talk then about how this is going to impact people's jobs, remove some jobs. I mean, I'm in the newspaper industry. I remember in the 90s, people said, well, newspapers are going to be vanished in a few years. And we're kind of getting to that point now, but that's been 30 years ago. So, uh,
Long
some
time.
yeah, it's like some of these changes, people see the opportunity and can see, okay, this is something that technologically could happen now, but there is a long way in some cases between that being a possibility and all the consumers adopting it and being comfortable with it and using it. So there is that factor for one thing is some of the AI stuff probably will take some time before it really has an impact. But then yeah, the other thing is that it will change things in ways probably a lot of people don't even can't even envision right now.
Mhm.
And, companies and innovators will see like, hey, it can do this or it can do that. And people will adjust to it. But yeah, I think there is a big reason or a big understanding of why people would not be very trusting of something they just don't know anything about and have never really heard of until a couple of years ago.
Well, that leads me in my question about what's a leadership decision that you've had so many interviews with leaders, strategy you've seen that had really made an impact on a company's success or failure. And you might have interviewed someone who talked specifically about a decision that came across that they either wish they hadn't done or they wish they had done. Can you talk to that, and especially with these business trends?
There are a few, or really a bunch, I guess, when you get down to it. One thing I'll mention is there are, for Investors Business Daily, we have these 10 secrets to success that our founder, Bill O'Neill, came up with decades ago. And that's the section where I write about one of them that has to do with trust, one of the secrets to success. That one also has to do in part with being honest and taking responsibility and being accountable. And those things kind of rolled together. I certainly see from a lot of leaders that have, typically that have done that. But even when it would seem to the outside that it's tough, they still are honest. They stick by their values and their mission. And instead of caving into a short-term temptation, they stick by their values, and that seems to be one to me, possibly because I write about it so much, but it definitely keeping that culture where you don't give in, it seems like that just spreads across a company very well. One of the best examples I think of, it sticks with me probably for a couple of reasons, but I am based in Cincinnati. Procter& and Gamble is based here, the big consumer products company, and I interviewed John Pepper several years ago, who used to be the CEO there. And we were talking about honesty, and there's a pretty famous example where P&G had some contractors that found by I think going through, I may have the details wrong on this, but I think they were going through a dumpster that was near one of their competitors. And they found all this material that gave away a bunch of trade secrets and things that could have really helped P&G. But the way they got it was not ethical, of course. And this got back to P&G and to John Pepper. They got rid of the people. They contacted the other company, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Unilever, but they contacted the rival company and they said, "Hey, this is what happened." But that's one of those things they could have easily said, "Why don't we take advantage of this? Who's gonna know where it came from?" But they would know where it came from, and it was the exact opposite of what their principles and values were, and they did not give in on that, and it just strikes me as kind of a pretty good illustration of, say, well, we'll be honest when things are going well and there are no real issues. For some people, it can be more challenging in a situation like that, but I remember asking John Pepper, "Well, was that a hard decision to make?" And he said, "No, it was one of the easiest decisions I ever made because it was so obvious what the right thing to do was."
Mm,
And he did not get distracted by, "Oh, well, what's the benefit?" It's sort of like, well, if you go to a store and they give you $1 extra change and you say, you gave me $1 too much. If they give you $4,000 extra in change, that probably won't happen. But, for some people, that'd be a lot harder to
that's
say,
right.
well, that's really not mine. But
Mhm.
if you stick by your principles, it's really not going to change anything.
Mhm. There's some consistency there too, because then
Yeah.
does the line move when on your values? Is it, and people need to feel secure and confident when there's consistency with how you approach any kind of challenge. If it's small, like what you just mentioned, is a great example, or if it's large. Well,
Yeah.
here's the fun part, and I would think, as you are a writer, but what are you reading and what are you watching?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I read a lot. I just finished a book actually by Eric Larson, who's a pretty well-known author, has written several books. The one I just read is called Dead Wake, and it's about the sinking of the Lusitania right before, well, before the US got into World War One. Actually, Europe was already entangled in it, but it's fascinating. And I mean, he's got detail in there like here's what a lot of these people that were on the ship were doing like 5 seconds before a torpedo hit it and sank it, and what where they went and whether they survived or not. It's really amazing. I do like reading a lot of, like, historical books like that. I like reading true crime and fictional crime-solving novels and things like that. I also read a lot of sports. I'm a huge sports fan, as I think you indicated earlier from the bio. I actually am reading a book about Bob Uecker. I'm from Wisconsin, and he was the Milwaukee Brewers radio broadcaster for more than 50 years, believe it or not. And he died about a year and a half ago. So I just read I'm reading, I should say, a book about him. And I do read a lot of business news every day and some books. As far as watching, we are just watching a show on HBO called Hacks that is about stand-up comedian who is in her early 70s and is kind of trying to revive her career. And she has a younger woman who has become her writer, and it's really fascinating. The actress who plays the younger woman is actually the daughter of Lorraine Newman, who was on Saturday Night Live on the initial cast. So,
Wow.
um, it it's really kinda cool, and it's very funny, and, so we're watching that. I mean, I certainly watch a ton of sports, so watching baseball games or NBA playoff games or NHL playoff games or whatever's on, so
Well, I can't thank you enough for those reads are great too, and those shows are great, and the
yeah.
advisement for our leaders. So thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, I'm glad to do it, Shanda. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for our listeners for liking the show and sharing it. We so appreciate you. We also appreciate our sponsors. Thank you to sponsor Miss Shannon Roof, Principal Real Estate Advisor and Agent Development Coach. And thank you to sponsor Ambrosia's Automotive, your number one ranked auto repair partner. And of course, until next time.
The Pen Leader podcast is hosted by Dr. Shanda Gore and brought to you by Mays & Associates Ltd, creating customized solutions for growth in the areas of leadership development, strategic planning, and culture building. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Pen Leader podcast and share with others.